The monitor said I was unconscious. My wife said that was probably for the best. My stepson asked how quickly the board could transfer my voting shares if I never woke up. They believed the machines had turned me into a silent piece of furniture. They were wrong. I heard every word, and by the time I opened my eyes, I already knew exactly who would lose everything. My name is Daniel Cross. I was 60 years old, living outside Savannah, Georgia, in a riverfront house on Wilmington Island. I had spent 34 years building Crossline Marine Systems, a company that designed hurricane-resistant docks, ferry terminals, and emergency seawalls. We employed 82 people. I knew every one of their names, and I trusted 4 members of my family more than all of them combined. That was my first mistake. My wife Elise was 56 and had been beside me for 27 years. Her son Victor Hale was 37. I met him when he was 8, taught him to swim, paid for college, and eventually made him chief operating officer. My biological son Owen was 30. My daughter Claire was 26. I believed blood and history had made us a unit. Victor was the polished one. He wore dark suits in August and spoke in sentences that sounded ready for investors. Owen handled client relations, though most clients remembered me, not him. Claire wanted nothing to do with the company. She worked as an emergency room nurse in Charleston and told me corporate dinners made her feel like everyone was eating with knives hidden under the table. The accident happened on a Thursday morning at our Port Wentworth fabrication yard. A hydraulic boom was lifting a steel floodgate when a locking pin failed. I remember shouting for 2 welders to move. I remember shoving one of them behind a barrier. Then the boom swung, struck the platform, and sent me 12 feet onto concrete. After that, there was darkness with sound inside it. Doctors called it a medically induced coma, complicated by swelling near my brain stem. They sedated me, ventilated me, and told my family I might remain unresponsive for 10 days. What nobody understood was that the sedation did not erase everything. I drifted in and out beneath it, unable to move, while voices entered the darkness like people walking into a room they believed was empty. Welcome back to Harbor Truth Stories. Settle in, because this is not a story about a man who survived an accident. It is about a family that began dividing his life before his body was cold. Tell me where you are listening from and stay until the end. The quietest person in that hospital room was never the weakest one. The first conversation I remember clearly happened on day 2. A neurologist explained that my scans looked better, but no one could predict when I would wake. Elise asked whether prolonged ventilation could damage my quality of life. Her voice was soft, concerned, perfect. If I had not known her for 27 years, I might have believed every syllable. The doctor said they were nowhere near making end-of-life decisions. Victor asked whether a temporary incapacity declaration could still be issued for business purposes. The doctor told him that was a legal question. Then Elise said Daniel would hate being trapped like this. He always said dignity mattered more than time. I had never said that. Not to her. Not to anyone. Owen entered a few minutes later and asked whether the company's insurance policy would pay before probate. Elise told him to lower his voice. He whispered that he had already found a condo near Tybee Island and needed to know whether he should make an offer. My son stood beside my bed, listening to a machine breathe for me and worried about losing a view. Then Claire arrived. Her shoes squeaked against the hospital floor. She did not hug anyone. She asked the doctor 3 questions about my pupil response, oxygen levels, and sedation dosage. Hearing her nurse's voice steadied me. Then she turned to the others and said, "Do not sign anything until Dad is gone." Every part of me went cold. Victor answered, "We cannot wait that long," Claire said. "Then you will have to do it without me." A chair scraped backward. Elise told her she was being dramatic. Claire replied, "I know exactly what you are doing." The door slammed. In the darkness, I believed my daughter had refused only because she wanted a larger share after my death. I would learn later how wrong I was. That evening, Elise returned with Victor and our family attorney, Miles Caro. Miles had handled our estate planning for 14 years. I heard papers sliding across the bedside table. Victor said the board needed proof someone could act before payroll was delayed. Elise asked where she should sign. Miles replied, "Only on the spousal consent. Victor will handle the rest." They were not discussing payroll. They were discussing control. Crossline's bylaws allowed an emergency trustee to vote my shares if 2 physicians declared me incapacitated and the existing trustee approved. I was the existing trustee. Victor knew that. He also knew where my signature samples were stored. The papers at my bedside were not an emergency plan. They were an attempted transfer disguised as concern. Elise touched my arm before leaving. Her hand felt warm against skin I could not command. She whispered, "I am sorry, Daniel. You should have trusted Victor sooner." Then she kissed my forehead. That kiss was worse than the legal papers. Fraud was business. That kiss came from the woman who had watched me build everything and decided unconsciousness made me replaceable. Over the next 4 days, I listened. Owen complained that my recovery was delaying his plans. Victor took calls in the hallway about a buyer named Meridian Coastal Holdings. Elise discussed selling our river house before medical expenses swallowed it. Miles told them the timing had to be exact. None of them noticed my pulse changing whenever they spoke. Claire came every night after midnight. She sat without turning on the television. Sometimes she held my hand. Sometimes she said nothing. Once she leaned close and whispered, "I know you can hear more than they think. Do not give them anything yet." I wanted to squeeze her fingers. My hand remained still, but something inside me began separating fear from strategy. On day 8, I opened my eyes while a respiratory therapist was adjusting the ventilator tube. He froze, then called the nurse. Within seconds, the room filled with light questions and people touching my face. I followed instructions, moved both feet, and wrote my name on a clipboard. The doctor called my recovery extraordinary. I called it well-timed. Elise arrived 40 minutes later. She cried before reaching the bed. Victor stood behind her, smiling carefully. Owen brought a balloon that said, "Welcome back," as though I had returned from vacation. Claire remained near the wall, watching everyone. I told them my memory was foggy and that I remembered almost nothing after the accident. Victor's shoulders lowered by half an inch. "That is normal," he said quickly. "Do not push yourself." Elise held my hand and told me the family had protected everything while I was gone. Owen said the company was running smoothly. Claire looked at me once. I blinked slowly, twice the signal we used when she was a child, and wanted me to know she was right without embarrassing anyone. Her expression did not change. I stayed in the hospital 3 more days. During that time, I acted tired, confused, and grateful. I asked the same question twice. I pretended not to recognize one board member immediately. Victor told the nurses stress should be minimized and intercepted every business call. He thought weakness had made me harmless. In reality, weakness had made him careless. The morning I went home, Elise dressed me in a blue shirt I had never liked. Victor pushed the wheelchair to the car. Owen filmed a short video for social media about miracles and family. Claire refused to appear in it. I smiled at the camera and said I was lucky. Every person watching believed the story was about survival. Only Claire and I knew it had become an investigation. Our house felt staged when I returned. Fresh flowers stood on every table. My study door was locked, though I had never locked it. Victor said they had secured sensitive business records. Elise prepared soup and placed my medication in labeled containers. Owen carried my suitcase upstairs, then asked whether I still remembered the password to the family trust portal. I laughed weakly and told him numbers were still swimming in my head. He patted my shoulder with relief disguised as sympathy. That night, I lay beside Elise while she slept peacefully. At 2:13 a.m., Claire texted a single sentence. I copied what I could before Victor changed the server permissions. "We need someone outside the family." The next morning, I called Helen Mercer, a forensic attorney in Brunswick who had once represented one of our suppliers. She had no connection to Miles Crossline or my family. I told her I needed to know whether my company had been stolen while I was breathing through a machine. She did not offer comfort. She said, "Bring me every device you still control." Helen worked from a narrow office above a marine insurance agency. Her conference table was scarred, her coffee was terrible, and her questions were precise. I gave her my hospital memories, the text from Claire, and a list of everyone with access to my accounts. She listened, then said the sentence I needed. "We will assume conspiracy until evidence proves incompetence." She brought in a forensic accountant named Samuel Price and a digital investigator named Nina Cole. Samuel had spent 20 years finding money hidden behind respectable invoices. Nina specialized in deleted corporate records. Neither knew my family. Neither cared about my reputation. That was exactly why I trusted them. Familiarity had become the place where every lie in my life had been stored. Claire met us after her night shift. She looked exhausted and angry. Before the accident, she had noticed Victor requesting copies of my medical directive trust certificate and digital signature token. When she questioned him, he claimed the bank required updated records. She followed him into a conference room one evening and heard Miles discussing an incapacity window. Claire had copied emails from a shared compliance folder before Victor removed her access. She had also photographed a draft resolution naming him emergency voting trustee. Her hospital sentence, "Do not sign anything until Dad is gone," had not meant dead. She meant gone from the room. She believed they were pressuring Elise to sign while I might still hear them. I apologized for doubting her, though I had never spoken the accusation aloud. Claire understood anyway. "You thought I wanted money," she said. I admitted it. She looked down for a moment, then answered, "I thought you chose the company over me for years. That does not mean I wanted it after you died. Truth can wound without being betrayal." Samuel began with Crossline's vendor ledger. Within 2 days, he found a supplier called Tidewell Procurement Group receiving monthly payments for specialized marine fasteners. The invoices looked legitimate, but shipping records did not exist. Tidewell's registered address was a mailbox in Jacksonville. Its controlling manager was a holding company linked to Victor through a former college roommate. The total was $724,000 over 31 months. Victor approved the purchase orders. Elise, who had signing authority through our household investment entity, guaranteed Tidewell's credit line. Owen approved 3 client entertainment reimbursements that returned money to the same account. He claimed later that he never looked closely. Greed rarely reads the fine print until the fine print becomes evidence. Nina recovered deleted messages between Victor and Miles. They discussed using my accident as leverage to complete a sale of Crossline's patented floodgate design to Meridian Coastal Holdings. Meridian was our largest competitor. Victor would receive a $2 million consulting contract after the transfer. Elise would receive a private payment through a real estate partnership in Hilton Head. The company itself was worth far more than they understood. They believed I owned 68% of Crossline personally, and that those shares would pass through my estate. 3 years earlier, however, I had quietly transferred voting control into the Crossline Employee Stewardship Trust. The employees did not yet know because the transition was scheduled to be announced at our 30th anniversary gala. I remained trustee only until that announcement. If I died or became incapacitated before the public transfer, control would pass to an independent committee, not my family. Victor had seen an old capitalization table and assumed it was current. His entire plan depended on stealing shares I no longer owned. That was the secret beneath everything, and only Helen, Samuel, Claire, and I knew it. The trust also contained an automatic protection clause. Any forged attempt to transfer voting control triggered an outside audit and suspended every officer involved. Victor had not activated it yet because Miles was still preparing the final filing. They intended to submit the documents on the Monday after our company gala, when the board would already be gathered and emotionally vulnerable. I asked Helen whether we should stop them immediately. She said we could freeze the filing, remove Victor, and report the fraud that afternoon. Then she asked whether I wanted only safety or the full truth. I thought about 31 months of theft, Elise's hospital whisper, Owen's condo, and every employee whose future had become their private currency. The full truth, I said. For 3 weeks, I recovered in public and hunted in private. I used a cane longer than necessary. I let Victor bring me edited reports. I thanked Elise for managing the house. I told Owen I might simplify the estate. He smiled so quickly that he had to turn it into concern. Their kindness became more attentive as they believed my mind had become less useful. Victor visited every afternoon with documents he claimed were routine. He placed yellow tabs beside signature lines and explained them slowly. I pretended my hand trembled too much to sign. One document authorized him to negotiate strategic technology partnerships. Another retroactively approved Tidewell as a preferred vendor. He was trying to make my future signature clean as past. I asked why Meridian was mentioned in a footnote. Victor said they wanted a limited licensing discussion. He looked directly into my eyes while lying. I had raised him from 8 years old. I knew how he looked when he broke a window, when he failed algebra, when he proposed to his first wife, and when he lied. The face had matured. The movement had not. Elise became impatient in subtler ways. She asked whether I remembered promising Victor more authority. She reminded me that Owen had sacrificed opportunities to work for the family. She suggested Claire's hospital schedule made her unstable and emotional. Each sentence attempted to isolate me from the only person who had protected me. I began recording every conversation with Helen's approval. One afternoon, Elise told me Claire had always resented Victor because he was not biologically mine. That was false. Claire resented Victor because he treated employees like disposable tools and expected family to excuse it. Elise had converted every moral objection into jealousy. I realized how often I had accepted that translation because it preserved dinner table peace. Owen's role was smaller but uglier than I expected. He had not participated in the forged trustee documents. He had, however, used confidential knowledge of my life insurance coverage to secure a provisional mortgage. He also charged $96,000 in personal travel, golf dues, and restaurant bills to Crossline over 2 years. Victor approved every reimbursement to keep him loyal. When Samuel showed me the expenses, I recognized dates. One dinner for 12 in Atlanta had been billed as a Port Authority meeting. That same weekend, Owen posted photographs from a bachelor party. A fishing charter in Key West became coastal risk research. My son had turned dishonesty into a lifestyle because no one had ever forced him to pay the actual price of anything. Claire asked whether I was going to destroy all of them. The question stopped me. I told her I was going to separate consequences from anger. Victor and Miles had committed crimes. Elise had enabled theft and attempted to use my incapacity. Owen had abused trust but had not forged documents. Each would receive exactly the response supported by evidence, not the response supported by my pain. That distinction mattered because pain is greedy. It wants witnesses, spectacle, and permanent damage. Justice wants records, sequence, and doors that close for reasons everyone can understand. I had built my career around structures surviving storms. Now I needed to build a consequence strong enough to survive every future accusation that I had acted from rage. Helen filed sealed motions to preserve the company accounts, patents, property records, and hospital communications. She obtained an emergency order preventing any transfer without alerting Victor immediately. Nina mirrored the corporate server. Samuel traced Tidewell's funds into a condominium deposit, luxury vehicle payments, and a brokerage account controlled jointly by Victor and Elise. Then Frank Dorsey, our longtime warehouse manager, asked to meet me. Victor had demoted him after Frank questioned missing shipments. We sat in an old diner near Garden City. Frank brought a box of receiving logs, showing Tidewell had billed us for materials that never crossed the gate. He had kept copies because, in his words, steel does not vanish politely. Frank also gave me something no accountant could calculate. He listed employees Victor planned to fire after selling the patent. 32 names. Welders, engineers, bookkeepers, and 2 veterans who had joined us after struggling to find work. Victor's consulting contract required reducing payroll before Meridian took control. My family was not merely stealing from me. They were preparing to erase other families. That night, I sat alone in my study and opened the original employee trust documents. Every signature represented the decision I had made after watching workers save Crossline during 2 hurricanes and a recession. I had intended the gala announcement as a gift. Victor had unknowingly turned it into a shield. The people he planned to discard already owned the future he wanted to sell. Crossline's 30th anniversary gala was 6 days away. Victor had planned it before the accident and now treated it as his coronation. The event would be held inside our restored river terminal beneath steel trusses my first crew had installed in 1996. Board members, employees, suppliers, city officials, and our family would all be present. Victor believed he would leave with authority to complete the Meridian deal. I told him I wanted to attend. He objected immediately, then changed direction when Elise said my appearance would reassure investors. They arranged a chair near the stage and shortened my speaking time to 3 minutes. Victor even offered to write my remarks. I thanked him and accepted the draft. It praised his leadership, described my recovery as uncertain, and announced that he would guide Crossline into its next chapter. The arrogance was almost elegant. Victor wanted me alive long enough to bless the theft, but weak enough never to challenge it. I read his speech at breakfast while Elise watched. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in my jacket. It says everything that needs saying, I told her. She smiled and kissed my cheek. That kiss felt like an invoice awaiting payment. Claire coordinated with Helen from Charleston. She would arrive separately and bring the original photographs, hospital notes, and server copies. Samuel prepared a visual timeline of the missing money. Nina built a secure presentation that could not be remotely deleted. Helen arranged for a federal financial crimes agent and 2 county investigators to wait in an office behind the terminal stage. I did not invite them to create drama. Meridian operated across state lines, and the attempted patent sale involved wire communications, forged corporate resolutions, and diverted funds. Helen said the authorities wanted Victor to speak freely before they acted. Men like Victor often confess without realizing it when they believe the room already belongs to them. The night before the gala, Owen came to the house carrying expensive bourbon. He poured 2 glasses and told me he had been thinking about family. That sentence usually means someone has been thinking about money while hoping to sound better. He asked whether I had updated my will after the accident. I told him I had. His eyes moved toward me, then away. Nothing major, I hope. I asked what major meant. He laughed and said he only wanted everyone protected. I thought about the provisional mortgage, the company card, and the condominium overlooking Tybee. Everyone will receive exactly what I believe they have earned, I said. He raised his glass, satisfied by his own interpretation. After he left, Elise asked why Claire had not visited all week. I told her hospital shifts were demanding. Elise said distance could become a habit, and that family should remember who had truly been present. She meant Victor. She always meant Victor. For years, she had measured loyalty by obedience and called any resistance abandonment. I had accepted her vocabulary for too long. I asked whether she regretted signing anything while I was unconscious. The question surprised her. She recovered quickly and said Miles had only handled temporary protections. "We did what you would have wanted," she told me. I looked at the woman across from me and finally understood the cruelty hidden inside that phrase. It erases the person while claiming to honor him. On Saturday evening, the river terminal, Waja, with suspended lights. Tugboats moved beyond the windows, their horns rolling across black water. Employees brought spouses and children. Retired welders stood beside young engineers. A wall displayed photographs from Crossline's first rented workshop, hurricane repairs, ferry launches, and crews eating barbecue on unfinished docks. I arrived using the cane. Applause broke out before I reached the entrance. It was not polite applause. People stood, shouted my name, and crossed the room to touch my shoulder. Frank Dorsey hugged me hard enough to hurt. In that moment, I felt the difference between people who value what you provide and people who value that you are still present. Victor moved through the crowd like a candidate on election night. He introduced Meridian executives to board members and spoke about continuity. Miles stood near the stage with a leather portfolio containing the forged resolution. Elise wore silver and accepted compliments about her strength. Owen told 3 guests that he might soon lead special strategic projects. Nobody had assigned him any. Claire arrived in a dark blue dress and went directly to Ruth Alvarez, our oldest office manager, not to the family table. Elise noticed. Victor noticed more. He crossed the room and asked Claire whether she had brought the form. Claire said she had brought everything he deserved. He laughed, believing it was sibling hostility. Claire did not. At 8:30, the board chair welcomed everyone. A short film played showing 30 years of Crossline projects. My younger face appeared on screen beside Cruz, who had gray hair now. The final image showed the words "built to outlast the storm." Victor placed a hand on my shoulder as if he already owned the message. The chair invited me to speak. Victor handed me his prepared pages and guided me toward the microphone. I moved slowly until I reached center stage. Then I set the cane against the podium and stood without it. The room changed. Victor's hand remained extended for a second after I stepped away. Elise stopped smiling. "My family has asked me not to tire myself," I began. "They have been very concerned about what I remember." A few people laughed gently. Victor did not. I removed his speech from my pocket, looked at the first page, and tore it once down the middle. The sound was small, but in that room it landed like splitting wood. I told the audience that the accident had left me unable to move, not unable to hear. Then Nina displayed the hospital timeline behind me. The date, hour, and speakers appeared on screen. Elise asking about ending aggressive treatment. Owen asking when insurance paid. Victor asking how quickly voting shares could transfer. The terminal became completely silent. I did not play every recording. Some pain does not become more truthful because strangers hear it. I played only one clip, Elise saying Daniel would hate being trapped like this, followed by Victor saying the board cannot wait for sentiment. Their voices echoed beneath the steel roof. Elise gripped the edge of her table. Owen stood first. "Dad, this is private." I looked at him. "You made my death a financing event. Privacy ended when you used it to shop for a condominium." Samuel's slide replaced the hospital timeline. It showed Owen's company expenses, personal trips, false client meetings, and the mortgage application supported by expected insurance proceeds. I announced that Owen's employment had ended at 6 that evening. His company card, vehicle allowance, and membership accounts were already canceled. Crossline would seek repayment of the unsupported expenses. My new estate plan left him a modest education trust available only for professional retraining or counseling. He received no cash and no company interest. Owen stared at me as if consequences were a language he had never heard spoken aloud. "I am your son," he said. I answered, "That is why I paid for your life long after you were old enough to build one. It is not a lifetime exemption from character." He sat down slowly, all resort confidence gone from his face. Then I asked Claire to join me. Murmurs moved through the room. Elise whispered something to Victor. Claire walked onto the stage and stood beside me. I told everyone that one member of my family had refused the forged incapacity plan preserved evidence and warned me while I could not respond. The person they had called emotional had been the only one thinking clearly. Claire did not smile. She looked at me and said quietly, "Tell them the rest." So I did. I announced that she would not inherit control of Crossline either. No family member would. The screen changed to the charter of the Crossline Employee Stewardship Trust. Workers began reading before I finished explaining. Then the first cheer rose from the fabrication crew. 68% of voting control belonged to the employees through an independent trust. Profit sharing would begin the next quarter. The board would include elected worker representatives. My family could not inherit, sell, or mortgage the company. Victor's entire succession plan had been built around shares that had already left my estate 3 years earlier. For the first time that night, Victor looked frightened. Not embarrassed. Frightened. He glanced toward Miles, then toward the nearest exit. Helen stepped from the side of the room and stood beside the board chair. Before anyone leaves, she said there are additional matters involving company property, forged records, and diverted funds. Samuel displayed the Tidewell invoices, bank transfers, and condominium payments. Frank's receiving logs appeared beside them. Every missing shipment, every false purchase order, every dollar routed through Victor's shell company was visible. $724,000 could no longer hide inside professional language. Employees who had worked overtime during those months watched Victor without blinking. Victor stepped toward the microphone and said the payments were legitimate consulting fees. Helen asked why a fastener supplier had paid his mortgage and why no fasteners had arrived. He turned to Miles. Miles closed his portfolio and moved away from him. Loyalty among thieves lasts exactly until one person realizes the evidence has page numbers. Then Nina displayed the deleted Meridian messages. Victor's consulting contract. The planned patent transfer. The list of 32 employees marked for termination. A welder named Jose Ramirez stood near the front holding his wife's hand. His name was number 4. Victor had smiled at Jose 10 minutes earlier and thanked him for 30 years of service. I asked Victor whether he remembered the first boat we repaired together when he was 12. He nodded once. "I taught you that damage below the waterline matters most because people cannot see it," I said. "You learned the wrong lesson. You decided hidden damage was safe." His mouth tightened, but he had no answer that could survive the room. 2 investigators entered from behind the stage. They identified Victor and Miles, separated them, and presented warrants covering wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and attempted theft of intellectual property. Victor looked at Elise as officers approached. She did not move toward him. In the hospital, they had acted like one machine. Under pressure, every part searched for its own escape. Before they led Victor away, he looked at me and said, "You never trusted me the way you trusted your real children." The words were designed for an old wound. Years earlier, they might have worked. "I trusted you with more than either of them," I said. "That is how you stole so much." He lowered his eyes. The officers escorted him through the same doors employees had used to enter. Elise remained seated. Helen placed divorce papers and a civil claim on the table before her. The claim sought recovery of diverted funds and damages related to the forged incapacity documents. Elise stared at the pages, then at me. "You planned this humiliation," she said. I told her I planned an accounting. Humiliation was what truth felt like after years of performance. I offered her no house, no company interest, and no protection from the investigation. Our prenuptial agreement preserved separate business assets. She could contest the marital settlement, but every disputed dollar would place the Tidewell records, hospital forms, and Meridian payments before a judge. Helen had prepared both paths. Elise understood immediately that one was merely quieter. She asked whether 27 years meant nothing. I told her they meant enough, that I had spent weeks verifying evidence before believing what I heard. "You did not lose this marriage because I woke up angry," I said. You lost it because you treated my body like a locked office and started emptying the drawers. The investigators did not arrest Elise that night. They served her with a preservation order and scheduled an interview. That restraint seemed to frighten her more than handcuffs would have. She had time to imagine every email signature and transfer waiting to speak. Consequences had entered the room and chosen not to rush. I understood the power of that better than anyone. I thanked the employees for staying through something they had never agreed to witness. Then I asked the caterer to keep serving dinner. At first, no one moved. Frank finally raised his glass and said, "To owning the place we keep fixing." Laughter broke the tension. Plates were filled. Children returned to the dessert table. Life remarkably resumed around the wreckage. Claire and I stepped onto the terminal balcony. The river was black beneath us, broken by tugboat lights. She asked whether I felt better. I said no. Better was the wrong word. I felt accurate. I knew who had loved me, who had used me, and which failures belonged to them or to me. Clarity is not comfortable, but it gives grief somewhere honest to stand. Victor eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy, wire fraud, and forgery. He received a prison sentence, restitution obligations, and a permanent ban from serving as an officer of any employee benefit trust. Miles lost his law license and cooperated to reduce his sentence. Meridian denied authorizing criminal conduct, paid a settlement, and abandoned every claim to Crossline's technology. Elise accepted a negotiated plea on fraud-related charges and received probation, community service, and restitution. Our divorce became final 11 months after the gala. She moved to Hilton Head with far less money than she had expected, and none of the status she had protected so fiercely. I did not celebrate. Watching a shared life become evidence is not victory. It is surgery. Owen sold the Tybee condominium contract before closing and repaid part of what he owed. For 6 months he blamed Victor, Elise, me, the company, and the accident. Then the excuses ran out. He enrolled in a logistics certification program, using the education trust, and found entry-level work at a trucking firm that did not know his last name. We speak occasionally. Our conversations are shorter and more honest than they used to be. I do not pay his bills. I do not call employers. I do not rescue him from embarrassment. Love without boundaries had helped keep him childish. The most fatherly thing I could offer was the experience of surviving his own decisions without my money softening every edge. Claire remained an emergency room nurse. She refused a board seat but accepted a position on the Employee Trust's Ethics Committee for 1 year. She said she wanted to make sure no one used the word family to bypass procedure again. We also began having breakfast every other Sunday without phones and without pretending the lost years did not exist. Frank Dorsey was restored as warehouse manager. The 32 employees on Victor's termination list received retention bonuses funded partly by the recovered Tidewell money. At the next gala, the workers elected 2 welders, an engineer, and an accounts clerk to the Trust Council. I stood in the back and watched people realize their voices had become structural. I sold the River House after the divorce and bought a smaller place near Thunderbolt Marina. The first night there I slept with the windows open. Around midnight a freighter sounded its horn across the water. I woke expecting panic and felt none. Silence no longer meant people were planning around my body. It simply meant the room was mine. The machine said I was unconscious. My family treated that as permission. What they never understood was that hearing the truth did not destroy me. It freed me from spending another year financing lies. They wanted my shares, my insurance, my house, and my silence. They received records, restitution, and the full weight of being known. People ask whether exposing them publicly was revenge. Maybe part of it was. I am honest enough to admit that. But the deeper purpose was protection. 82 employees deserved to know who had placed their jobs on a secret list. Claire deserved to have her courage named. And I deserved to stop calling betrayal a misunderstanding simply because it came from people seated at my table. I survived because a worker tightened my harness correctly. Doctors refused to rush, and my daughter listened when everyone else was calculating. I rebuilt because truth, unlike inheritance, cannot be divided by people waiting at a bedside. The last message Elise ever sent asked whether I heard everything. I answered with 4 words, enough to wake up. Then I blocked the number. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who has mistaken endless access for love. Families are not protected by hiding what they do in private. They are protected when loyalty has standards and wrongdoing has a cost. Subscribe for more stories about fathers, husbands, and ordinary people who discover that the quietest comeback can still shake an entire house.